It's really great to be here. I'm Claire Chambers from the University of York and the editor for this book, Desi Delicacies. I'll be moderating today's panel. So please could you put yourselves on mute, panelists, until you're asked your question. As Tabish said, it can be a cacophony. To the attendees, you're very welcome as well. It's great to see 66 people at present. So how this is going to work today is I'll ask each author basically one question, possibly with some follow-up questions, but we have to try and keep each author to a max 5 minutes. And I may have to interrupt if people are very enthusiastic, just so that everybody has a chance to speak. Then with as much time as we have left, I'll read out questions. So please, I see that people are already using the chat function to talk, especially after our bumpy start. So please continue with questions in the chat and I'll read those out to all of them, or you may want to direct your question to somebody in particular and I'll make sure that I get through those at the end. So this book, which I held up the beautiful cover, it's a collection of 8 essays, short stories, recipes and illustrations about food from Muslim South Asia and diaspora. For me, one of the most important and special things about Desi Delicacies is that it diverges from the issue-based or problem-centred topics South Asian Muslims are often expected to write about. Instead, the volume offers a delicious, sensual exploration of the maxim, "We are what we eat." Put differently, food is an important marker of identity for any culture. What people consume or refuse to consume becomes a highly detectable or indeed delectable identity marker in the context of post-coloniality and migration. Food's flexible, identity-oriented qualities evidently whetted these creative writers' appetites. The subject of food from Muslim South Asia was interpreted very broadly by these contributors. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over for a few words from Siobhan Lambert-Hurley. So Siobhan, could you tell us a bit more about Forgotten Food, the research project to which the anthology belongs?
Thanks, Claire. I'm really grateful to Claire for giving me the chance to speak first with a kind of brief word from our sponsors, as it were. As Claire said, I lead the research project, which is entitled Forgotten Food, Culinary Memory, Local Heritage and Lost Agricultural Varieties in India, out of which this collection, Desi Delicacies, has emerged. I do have to say the money bit here. This is a project which is funded by the Global Challenges Research Fund through the Arts and Humanities Research Council in the United Kingdom, and it's based at the University of Sheffield, which is my own institution. Now, I talk in my own afterword for the piece about all the kind of exciting things that we're doing in this project, but I guess what underpins the project more than anything is the idea of academics of different sorts working with practitioners also of different sorts. And it's really about using food history and food literature to invigorate local heritage agendas. So as I write in my chapter, it's about bringing economic and cultural benefits to struggling communities and to foster a sense of social cohesion. And I guess we hope we might also do some things that might inform food production in the future too. So this is really a project in which we bring together literary scholars like our esteemed editor, Claire Chambers, and academic historians like myself, and also our partner at JDM College at the University of Delhi, Dr. Soumya Gupta, who I hope is here as well. We also work with sociologists and plant scientists, and we're also working with the most amazing group of authors, popular historians, chefs, filmmakers, and performers, many of whom, of course, spin their tales in this book. So I hope you'll enjoy Desi Delicacies. I hope you'll enjoy the virtual launch. I also wanted to say I hope you'll follow the work that we're doing, both now and over the next couple of years. The sort of things we're doing ranges from growing heritage rice and Reiktigoi performances to fascinating documentaries. We also have an ongoing column in Scroll. We've got a cookbook planned of Rampuri cuisine, And ultimately, we're going to round up the project with a heritage food festival that we'll be hosting in Rampur in autumn of 2022. And of course, there'll be academic events and publications too. So I hope you will follow along what we'll be doing with this exciting project. I thought what I'd do is I'll put my Twitter handle in the chat, and then you can follow through that way. Thanks.
Thank you, Siobhan. That's great. So next up, Rana Safvi essay. She's the first essay writer that we have here, and hers takes a panoramic and often nostalgic look at the traditional Dastakhan and eating etiquette of Lucknow, in contrast with present-day time-saving cookery. So Rana, please could you tell us a bit more about Lucknowi cuisine? You need to unmute.
Yes, I unmuted. Thank you so much, Claire, and thank you, Siobhan. And I'm really honored to be part of such an amazing anthology. And to come back to the chapter that I wrote on kormas and kaliyas, food is something that is a very integral part of any family, wherever, anywhere in the world. And for families like us, where we are all foodies, it's even more so. And just now, as I'm sitting here, and it's quite cold here in Delhi, and I'm remembering, you know, sitting in the kitchen, a small kitchen in my grandmother's house, all of us crowded around a stove where food is burnt. And I'm talking about maybe 50 years ago, and hot chapatis are being turned off from the tawa or the griddle, and we're all sitting around listening to stories that my grandmother would tell us. She was an amazing cook, and it's from her that I have inherited skills of cooking and all the knowledge that I have, a lot of recipes also. My mother was totally uninterested in food. Her philosophy in life was that I, you know, eat to live and not live to eat, which was totally unlike what I and my father thought. So as soon as I learned to cook, I was encouraged by my father to start cooking and to, you know, experiment. And he bought me a lot of recipe books. The first book that I owned was a book called Ismati Dastarkhan, which I use a lot in my recipes. It was written by the Begums of Awadh, and it is a collection by Nazli Begum Delhi, and it had recipes from the houses of the Begums of Awadh. And so I started experimenting with that, using it, trying it to the modern, suiting it to the modern palate and to the modern meals. So we no longer can eat as much of cream and khoya or condensed milk as we could when we were maybe 100 years ago. So I started that, and you know, I learned a lot of things from my grandmother, then from my aunts as I started cooking. Now, today only somebody put up a beautiful picture of a korma that she had cooked, and on that was sprinkled green coriander leaves. Now, this is something that we were taught from children, that every dal, every lentil that we have, it has a different kind of tempering, the baghar as we call it. So if we are eating arhar ki dal, the baghar will be garlic. If we are eating masoor, then there will be cumin seed. So these are niceties which we have lost along the way. Now, the difference between korma and kaliya, which I've tried to show in that book, is that we don't use turmeric for korma. Turmeric is used in kaliya, and kaliya is a very, you know, it's a conspiracy by the ladies to make sure that the men eat their veggies, because they've introduced every kind of vegetable into the kaliya. So kaliya uses vegetables and it uses turmeric, as opposed to korma, which was a more festive dish and used a paste of fried onions and curds. So, and we never garnish it with green coriander leaves. Only things which have tomatoes and haldi or turmeric are where we use hara dhania. So these are some small niceties which we've forgotten, and I try to keep remembering. Then I always feel that if you're very lazy, you just add a lot of garam masala, spices and oil to it. Because the main taste of the food, whether it is vegetable or meat, it comes out only when you roast it. And as I learned from my grandmother, that korma aise bhuno jaise dushman ka kaleja. You know, roast the korma, keep roasting the masala as if you are roasting your enemy's heart. So, you know, you put in your heart and soul and do it with a lot of passion. So food is passion, and cooking is also passion, and it's my passion.
That's great. Thank you so much. I'm glad you read that quote because that's my favorite. I think that's so, I've been telling people when I cook that I'm roasting their hearts. So next we have Saliha Kamal, and your beautiful essay gives the volume its title, Desi Delicacies. So that was your phrase. You discussed the gendered division of domestic labour and how food had its place in Pakistan's Aurat, or Women's March. What made you want to write about feminism among other issues in your essay, Saliha?
Yeah, thanks, Claire. That's a really interesting question, actually. So whenever I think of cooking, whenever I think most of us think of cooking, it's associated with our mothers and grandmothers. And there's, of course, a long history of the unfair division of labor and all of that. And I feel like it's kind of associated with feminism to kind of not be able to cook. And that was kind of a reactionary thing that sometimes came up. And in my academic work, I'm really interested in South Asia. I'm also really interested in women's history and, you know, the division of labor. In that sense, I wanted to kind of talk about my love of cooking and how I came to it, and, you know, what it means to me for cooking to have this kind of fraught history, and then, you know, what it means for women of my generation now enjoying cooking on their own terms, and what it could mean to kind of, you know, reclaim that practice and use it to connect with our cultures, but, you know, take out that part of it that has kind of soured the experience for so long, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the things you talk about is this younger generation, and you're quite switched on to a digital age of cooking videos on YouTube and sort of the sharing of memes and so on. So I wonder if you could talk just briefly about that kind of electronic take on cooking from millennials and younger.
Yeah, so I think it's something really interesting that's happening with food culture and millennials. I was talking to the food editor of the New York Magazine last year, and he said something like, you cannot dissociate food from like the Instagramification of food now. So that Instagram has become kind of a function in how even restaurants market themselves. So with this whole digitization of food, so basically what's happening is, you know, there are food bloggers, there are food Instagrammers. So the look and aesthetic of food matters a lot. And it's all about, you know, making it grammable, putting it up on Instagram, sharing those photos. All of that has kind of awakened an interest in food in people that would normally not be that interested in food or wouldn't look at it too closely. So there's obviously the criticism that if you're photographing food, you're not really paying attention to it. But I feel like this has reawakened food to a kind of attention that was lost in the middle. And now a lot of people who share pictures of food online have also really gotten interested in swapping recipes, you know, watching cooking shows, and kind of involves everyone. And there's obviously also a new wave of cooking shows. So previously there just used to be, you know, professional chefs on a couple of food networks here and there that were, you know, the center of the food cooking video world. But now you see people rising up through YouTube even. There's this really famous channel, Binging with Tabish, and it's just a filmmaker who started cooking on his own, and he, you know, perfected the art, but not through professional training, but through practicing it over and over again and adapting home cooking techniques. And then he became so big that he now has a food video network that has hired proper chefs. So I think it's something really interesting, almost democratizing about the internet. That's also been really important for the food world, in my opinion.
Moving to Kezahak, in Alhamdulillah with Gratitude and Relish, this is your essay which opens with the food of your Bengali childhood and takes us through to the Dhaka restaurant scene of 2020, where you say anyone coming this way is welcome to join us. So I just wanted to ask you, nostalgia is something that's often evoked in gustatory writing, and I wondered why you thought food has such a close relationship with memories, which is something that's very strong in your essay.
Well, all good things, I think, play a very important role in memory. And as one grows up, among the things that stick in the memory are the good things one has eaten. And as one grows up and starts growing old, like me, one also reflects on the changes which have taken place, and I think a common theme among old timers when they have an adda, is all the good things that they miss. The foods that they had at one time, which have lost the peculiar flavor, which was so attractive. How the things, even the ingredients, are not of the same quality as they used to be. So memory and eating are, I think, inseparable. And looking back, which I do in that essay, I also reflect, or rather mull over the habits and the customs which are associated with eating, the practices, the rituals, the things one utters, like grace in Islam, you have certain formulaic expressions which are commonly used, and the changes taking place, of course. I also reflect on the broader implications of talking about food, and one can't escape the fact that we are living in a world which grows enough to feed everybody, but in which not everybody is properly fed. And this is, I think, one of the major problems which faced us. I love, like everyone here, I not only love eating, I love talking about food. And talking about food includes reminiscing about all the good things one has eaten. And it's also interesting to sort of note down how people enjoy talking about food. I remember in the Bangladesh war, in a sector headquarters, there was one chap, he was doing the work of a staff officer. And whenever we sat down to a meal with him, he would start talking about a particular fish cooked in a particular way, which he had eaten in a remote part of the country. And that was the sole topic of conversation with him. And he had an endless fund of stories to tell about all the things he had eaten. So, yeah, I think nostalgia and eating are inseparable.
That's great. Thank you so much. I think that will also be nice to talk to Mafrua, because her essay, later we'll talk about that. But one of the things is that the Bangladeshi woman who abhors fish, and what a kind of aberration that is. So you've given us a lot there, Koza. Thank you. So next, Tabish Khair. If you could turn your video on, that's great. In your fascinating essay, Tabish, you discuss how there is a tendency to exoticize food in South Asian literature. This is very different from your approach in the essay, Tabish, which is titled Juta. So please, could you tell us more about your decision to write about food waste for the anthology?
Thank you, Claire. First of all, it's such a pleasure to be part of this anthology. Just the fact that we are we are doing this online launch, and I can see friends I haven't met for a long time. You yourself, Claire, Amir, and writers I have never met, but I've been reading for years. Rana, so many others there. That itself makes this anthology a feast. So it's a pleasure to be part of it. Now, to answer your question, being born in a Muslim family in India, obviously, the taboos around food and who eats and who doesn't eat and who eats what are elements that exercised my concern. Muslims, of course, insist on halal food. We don't touch pork. On the other hand, in India, some Muslims can be lynched on the mere suspicion of perhaps eating beef. And these were things that were at the back of my mind, and I was thinking of actually my own creative writing, where obviously I also written a lot about food. Food is an important part of Indian English fiction, but I started thinking more about what about those people who relate to food differently, and then I could think of O.P. Valmiki's Jutan, which is an autobiographical account of Valmiki growing up as a Dalit. I think it's set in 1950s, 60s in his childhood, or maybe even a bit earlier, but I think 1950s in his childhood. And one of the excerpts is about how the village, this village of Dalits, sit outside the wedding of a rich upper caste person and wait for the food to be thrown out on pattals and paper plates and so on and so forth, that they collect it and take it home and keep it for months sometimes if they can. And that also brought made me think of my own experience with Juta. The fact that, for instance, when I was growing up, when I was a child, in my grandparents' place, there were these old family retainers. And when we ate some food, the children, and we would just say, take a bite of something and leave it in the plate, these family retainers would, when they would be taking away the plate, they would take the food and eat it. Okay. So there was no real feeling of juta. On the other hand, when the children of some of these family retainers who would come and work part-time during festivals or something, they would never touch any juta. Okay. So there were all these different elements, and I thought I would work with those elements to talk about what it means to eat and how we eat. Because obviously food, apart from everything else, is also, as anthropologists have said, as philosophers have said for a long time now, food is a very, very rigorous element of identity. What you're allowed to eat, how you're allowed to eat it, where you're allowed to eat it, and what you're not allowed to eat. So that's basically what went into my essay. Thank you.
Thank you, Tabish. That's great. Then in Annie Zaidi's fabulous Chewing on Secrets, you talk about kitty parties, closely guarded and generously shared recipes, and above all about the love the grandmother, the late grandmother, stirred into sweet dishes she used to make for her young relatives. For your question, Annie, I wanted to ask you again about the just different generations' approaches to food, from the grandmother's quite traditional methods to the digital age, because you've got a family WhatsApp group, people talking on that about food, so it brings it right up to the present. How are approaches to food altering across the generations?
Yeah, thank you, Claire. And I'd like to again begin by saying that this is such a fabulous book and I am so pleased to be part of it. I do feel a little bit like an interloper because I am, to be very honest, not a foodie. I've always grown up saying I'm not a foodie and what am I doing here then? I am interested in people's attitudes to food a lot. I'm much more interested in the conversations around food and how food reveals people and reveals character and reveals people's relationships to each other in that way. So I was very attached to my grandmother, and my grandmother was not very educated, but food was one of the ways in which she showed her love for everyone, not just me, everyone in the family. Each time we visited, she was constantly cooking, like boxes and boxes and tins of food, not just to eat, but for us to take away with us. Just sweets of all kinds, and of course there was a lot of pleasure in it, but you didn't know what it meant until you'd lost it. So when she died, it finally hit home that all of that love was gone. I mean, you can buy sweets and you can buy food, but you can't buy that. I missed that a lot. And also with each generation, with the passing of each generation, food visits, they're one way of holding people together, holding families together. And when a person who's sort of at the center of the family dies, you're afraid the family will fall apart. Like when your grandparents' generation dies, the family isn't as close, the next generation and then the next generation. So I was really, for a few years between my grandparents' death to the next few years after, there was this question of how do we now renegotiate our relationships in a family, cousins to cousins, siblings, uncles, aunts. How do we then learn to hold together, hold each other together as a family? And again, it is always around food, because then you meet at weddings or you meet at funerals, or whenever you come, food is always at the center of it. Who is cooking, how much, for whom? I write about my aunt in my essay. She is, of course, a good cook, and food is very, very important to her. So I think when she started replicating some of the things that my grandmother used to do, that also pulled me closer towards her and to her children. She really enjoys secrets too, so I write about her in that way. That in Hindi we have this phrase "maze lena." So she'll keep the secret maze ke liye. It's not such a closely guarded secret, really. Everybody knows. She just won't tell you because she knows you want it. And I enjoy that a lot. Those are the things that I find fascinating. And sometimes just to people, I'll make something and I won't tell them what I've put in it. Just maze ke liye. It's not, I'm not a good cook. I just do it just for kicks. So those are the things. And to the next generation, yes, now, I mean, this year, Corona particularly, we couldn't meet at all. We would have met the family a few times a year, but we've constantly exchanged, like both the Eids this year, each member of the family was cooking something. Like everybody shares photographs of their sivai, and you can tell that it's a different kind of sivai, a different kind of kheer. That it keeps you together, right, as a family. If you can't eat each other's food, the least you can do is look at each other's pictures. So I find that those are the things that draw me to food, and the conversations around food I find very interesting.
That's great, Annie, thank you. The point about being an interloper, I think I feel it too, but now you're a published food writer, so I tell my kids, shut up, your mum's, if you're complaining about lunch, your mum's got a food book now. So it can empower us. And the point about coronavirus this year, I think that's been a lot of the problem, because I do enjoy cooking, but this year especially with we're all having to do so much more because kids in the house when they were supposed to be at school and things like that, it becomes less of a pleasure sometimes because we've had to do so much of it. So our final essayist is Sadaf Hussain, author and Indian MasterChef contestant Sadaf Hussain, who makes us see those South Asian staples of tea and samosas in a new light, undercutting widespread assumptions of Muslims in a warm and funny way. Today, could you talk about why you decided to subvert stereotypes at this time with your essay?
Thank you, Claire. It's interesting that all the conversations so far I've heard, especially Annie's last comment on maze ke liye. In fact, I totally agree with the fact, maze ke liye, because most of us, I think when the lockdown started, we all were cooking maze ke liye, and mostly for Instagram. which is what also Suleha mentioned about Instagram-worthy photos and food. A couple of things that sort of I try and break. Of course, one of them comes from a food stereotype. First, who cooks food, and also who eats what kind of food. So I am a chef, clearly you mentioned. Now, one of the things that I realized that mostly if you're coming from a Muslim family, your parents would often tell you, well, actually not just Muslim family, in general, your parents will tell you, no, in Hindi it will be, hamara beta bawarchi banega, which is our son will not become a cook. However, if a son cooks food in the kitchen, he gets rewarded or he gets appraised. The same thing if a woman does or a daughter does, that's a daily job or a routine. So that's one thing that I really wanted to sort of challenge, and so far, in a way, small little ways, I have been sort of accomplishing all these things, because in our kitchen, I'm the one mostly in the kitchen cooking, as well as cooking for living as well. Most often cooking for living, not always. So that's first. And second thing is, I realized that when it comes to Muslim food, we as in our knowledge is limited to biryani, kebabs, kolmas. I think that's about it. So this is what, in general, people think Muslim cuisine is all about. And as well as I think our history is very limited to Mughals. So in Indian history, it starts from Mughals and ends to British, right? Nobody else came before Mughals. Nobody came after Mughals. So that's in a way is very interesting. The two dishes I talked about is chai and samosa, which is an equal part of a Muslim's family as well, just like a khichdi, which or curd rice, tayyar sadam, or anything else for that matter, is part of Muslim food as well. Interestingly, both chai and samosa comes from outside India. They are not quote unquote indigenous. When the samosa came in, it had meat. And what I try and sort of talk about in the chapter is that how samosa, which was sambusak, which was a meat version, which we still get in India, and actually not just in India, but in Bangladesh, in Pakistan, everywhere else as well. We sort of Indianized the food, the samosa, with potato in it, right? That also 300, 400 years went back, because Portuguese came in and they brought in potatoes. So how these two dishes are also similar to what people eat in general. Also Muslims, they also eat and drink chai, and I mentioned in my chapter as well how my family is obsessed with chai. Their day starts with chai, and these days, because I think people are a lot more taking care of themselves, so trying to drink water, but normal water doesn't really taste good, so they are making green tea, and hence one green tea post dinner is now a necessity. So starts with a masala chai and ends the day with green tea, which is interesting. And that's why I said that Muslims also eat and drink almost the same thing. Our spices could be different, our cooking preparations could be different, but it is what we eat, it is what you eat, and it's not any more Muslim food. I like to call it a Hindustani food. So it's the Hindustani cuisine that we all have, and there is no religion in that particular dish.
That's a fantastic answer. Thank you so much. So moving now to the stories. So part one we've been through, which is the essays, and then part two is a collection of short stories, of which the first is Aftertaste by Tarana Husain Khan. In it, the protagonist, Zaidi, is someone who bathes the dead and prepares them for funerals. Death comes with an aftertaste of tar roti is the story's unforgettable first line. So could you talk to us a bit more about this link between food and funerals, which I think has already been mentioned, but it's very strong in your story? Tarana, you're on mute. Sorry.
Okay, sorry. So thank you so much for the question, and it's such a pleasure to be a part of this fabulous anthology and to be a part of this panel with some of the writers that I've loved reading over the years, and some new writers also who are absolutely fantastic in this anthology. So when I wrote Aftertaste, I was thinking about this whole idea of synesthetics, that is the different senses that are evoked by food, and not just the senses but the memories and the different cultural subtexts and the social subtexts around food, which is extremely complicated and complex. So I've always seen that during funerals, they serve either pulao or tar roti, which is a very rich meat curry. And so this story came from actually watching this very frail Saidani. Sayyids are people supposed to be from the Prophet's family. And so her work was to bathe the dead women of the town. And she's assisted by this other woman who's obviously kind of a rural, kind of a hefty woman, because she does all the lifting and all that stuff. So this is the general scene in Rampur and maybe a number of other Muslim household where there's death. And I got to think about what death means to her. So from that came the story that for her, the announcement of death came with the idea of tar roti, this rich meat curry that she loved. So she would bathe, and it also meant, of course, some earnings. So, and while she is bathing this woman who is actually her ex-lover's wife, she is filled with all the memories around tar roti of the past, as well as in the present. She's very alive to the flavors. She can smell that the onions are burning, and she feels that, oh, the tar roti might not be the same. So what it's a sort of a stream of consciousness while she's alive in the moment. And it also talks about what is the cultural context of tar roti. Basically, it always used to upset me. Oh my God, you know, they've just buried the dead and now they are just eating pulao and tar roti. The point was that it was a very tribal kind of a meat curry, where no fuss curry, where all the masalas were put and just let to simmer, because they were feeding a whole tribe. Lots of people would come to pay their respects. So what is the easiest thing to make, and what would feed everybody would be meat. Secondly, you know, since it's sponsored by a close relative, so he cannot give a khichdi or a dal chawal. So he has to show that, okay, I can give pulao to, you know, 100, 500 people. So that was the idea of this story: food, death, and all the flavors and the memories that come together as an aftertaste. And what tar roti meant then and now, and how it has changed. Thank you so much for your question.
Thank you, Tarana. Moving to Rosie Dastgir. In your story, which has a British setting, a divorced protagonist, Raman, struggles to make orange food like fish fingers and baked beans for his young son, Sammy, in his new position as a single dad. Please could you talk through how the arrival of a pamphlet from Pakistan from an aunt gives him the urge to make the healthy drink black carrot kanji in this story?
Thanks, Claire. Yes, I wanted to kind of touch on the idea of the protagonist's struggle with living in an English regional town, and deal with the difficulty in procuring the sorts of the spices and the foods that he used and he loved from his childhood and his young adulthood in an English setting. And he feels very insecure about his food choices, and he's surrounded by fairly traditional English people. And the arrival of this pamphlet triggers a memory from his past of a flavor of a very special drink called a kanji, which dovetails rather nicely with his conversion of his flower garden into a vegetable patch. And I wrote the story during lockdown when I was in Tokyo, and I was somewhat disoriented, not speaking the language there, and kind of lonely, but in a positive way for a writer. And there was a man who was tending his allotment in the flat next door to ours, and I used to watch him quite a lot, and it made me think of Rahman as this character who in the midst of his sort of sorrow and difficulty, he finds a way of being through the soil and through the vegetable. And I love the idea of the carrot having this deep colonial history. And I came across a pamphlet online called The Brief History of the Carrot in Pakistan. And I love the kind of almost the grandeur of the title. And I read the pamphlet, and that sort of inspired me to come up with a character who was an aunt who was a scholar and passionate about this subject. And that's how I dovetailed that with his story.
It was interesting because somebody who couldn't be here today, Farah Zama, who's another British contributor, he also completely independently had this idea of a depressed, sort of divorced father struggling to get ingredients. I mean, he also added in a sort of Alzheimer's mother plot, but I found it interesting. There's a lot of orphans, a lot of loss, divorce, funerals. I think we see in this volume that when people think about food, they think about sort of joyful gatherings, but they also think about, pain and loneliness, like you were saying, Rosie.
Yeah, and also I suppose I wanted to kind of to play against the notion of food always being a source of joy and that everyone loves eating. And I think I wanted to kind of capture this thing that we had in England when we were growing up in the 70s and 80s, that there wasn't, English food was pretty terrible, and there wasn't really space for so-called ethnic cooking and Indian and Pakistani cooking, although, there were restaurants and so on. It hadn't really kind of fused with sort of traditional English cuisine. So I kind of wanted to I wanted to capture that. And that's not so much nostalgia, but the idea of fusion and the way in which the character transcends the sort of the conservatism around him. So, yeah.
Then staying with this idea of kind of loss and difficulty with food, Asiya Zahor is the next story, which is called The Hairy Curry, and it's about food and servitude in Srinagar. Asiya, could you discuss the cuisine of Kashmir and why you elected to write about the dish Nadu Yakni, or yogurt curry?
Hello, Claire, and everybody. I'm so excited to be here today, and I'm so happy to be a part of this anthology. It's been a very interesting journey. The food in Kashmir is very much linked to the history as in other places, and most of the influence is, I think, from Central Asia. During the 14th century, when many people from Central Asia migrated, some to spread the word of religion, and others to escape persecution. And most of them were also Sayyids, like the the people who were from comparatively affluent backgrounds, and they were people who were associated, some of them in even royal. So the food is very elaborate and very rich in Kashmir. The Wazwan itself is like a 30-course meal, and every dish is cooked very elaborately in their professional chefs, the wazas who prepare it. And this is not just for a certain class of people, but everybody. For instance, in any function like a marriage or a birthday or any other function, necessarily have to make this preparation, the wazwan. So this makes the Kashmiri cuisine, different from the other cuisines in the subcontinent. That's one thing. And this was not just the food which came, but also the other it became the like the Kashmir, the food becomes like the byword for Kashmir, like in the high-end restaurants you have the urban elite consuming the wazwan, and that's how they know Kashmir through the food and through pashmina, paper mache. So these basically have Central Asian influences, and the yakhni, which I'm talking about, is also a part of Wazwan, but that is a meat preparation mostly, and this is a sort of a deviation from that. But it's also like one of the what you call the expensive vegetables, which the poor maybe cannot afford. That's what is the, what we're looking at is this story. It's about this boy who comes as a domestic help to the city, and the whole story is right from the cleaning till the the preparation, and the end of the story is also when the dish is prepared and eaten. So as I said, that it's very elaborate, and mostly the domestic helps have to do the hard part of it, the hard work. That's what it is about. But it's also about the idea of like the Dastarkhan being the used as the setting to dramatize the harmony or disharmony within the family and in the society at large. So that's also one element in this, and the fact that there's a huge difference between the village and the city life into which this character, the protagonist, is trying to find his way, and he doesn't know about the vegetable, is also the fact that it also shows, the food also shows the limitations set on this boy.
That's great. And Asia, it's so nice that you could be here. That we've been, it's like with a lot of you, I'm seeing people's faces for the first time, and Asia and I, we've had a few difficulties communicating because of her being in Srinagar till now, but there's such a great story. And I made this curry, this Nadu yakni, but with bottle gourd, because obviously I couldn't get lotus root here, and it worked out very well. And I should say that all of each story or essay is accompanied with a recipe. So next we have Farah Yamin, who conjures up a kitchery of women's frustrations, ambitions, ghosts, madness, and medicine in The Night of Forgiveness. Farah, I'd be interested to hear you talk about women's relationship to food in a joint family setting, such as the one portrayed in your story.
Hi, Claire. Thank you so much for letting me write this. This was my first time I ever wrote fiction. So it was quite an interesting experience, and Claire really handheld me through the first draft to the final writing. I think what prompted this specific story was that, while food is an act of love and maybe even an act of mourning, but I was particularly interested in how food is perhaps to a lot of us women the only arena where we have control. So it's also about control, and which is why you will hear a lot of stories about how women do not allow men inside the kitchen, because that is their domain. So I was exploring control, and also the fact that I think most Muslims from the subcontinent would have grown up with stories of jinns and the very thin line between madness and supernatural possession and intervention in our lives. And both of them go together. There's equal belief in both. And we approach cure or approach control of possessions similarly, in terms of both prayers and sometimes medicine and sometimes not medicine. Especially in old families, that are joint families, where there are various wisdoms on how it should be dealt with. So I was exploring how food is used to show and to express and both withdraw love, and as a method of control over our own lives. And that is what the protagonist Bunnu and Ammi, because the writing is from the perspective of a little child who talks about her aunt and her mother and their relationship. So how they use food to control their lives and their own frustrations.
And you mentioned medicine, and you know, so sort of traditional, the jinns and spiritual ideas, and also, you know, Western medicine, because the woman is a doctor. That one of the main characters is a doctor. So I wonder, you know, can food be seen as a medicine too? You know, just, you know, in those sort of more traditional ideas.
Yeah, so two ways. One is that there are certain foods that are, I think Rana also mentioned it in her essay, some foods are considered tayyab. And in fact, in COVID, you would have seen a lot of forwards going around where they recommended nigella seeds as something that the Prophet has advised to everybody as a cure. And besides that, there is also food that you recite incantations over, and that makes that food tayyab or good for you or curative. So there are various ways of approaching food as a cure and as medicine that are very, very deeply linked to your culture, and things that would be considered medicine in my family might not be considered medicine in your family, or completely outrageous to feed to somebody when they are unwell. So yeah, that too. I mean, but a lot of medication also happened by reciting the verses from the Quran over just a glass of water, for instance, or reciting certain names of the God several times over a glass of water to have a certain effect. So food was also used like that.
That's fantastic. We also have a bonus guest, so we're very lucky to have Amir Hussain here. You're very welcome, Amir, and we're lucky to have you. Thinking about Asia's essay, which had the servant boy Gula, you talk about the service industry in London. So please, could you talk us a little bit more about diasporic foodways of the service industry in Britain?
Yeah, well, I'd say my story is more about expats and migrants. And those economic categories, I think, for the summer and away in the winter, and the migrants that want to come to their fortunes, and that, of course, supply and demand thing going on. And why biryani becomes the focus of everything, I really don't know. Because the story was originally written in Urdu for a Pakistani readership and then translated into English. They find it very funny. They say, but why are these expats all so obsessed with biryani? We've got so many other foods. Now, I personally am mostly vegetarian. So during bring me something, cook something for me, and I'm looking for things like khichdi and dal and rice, which most people are not prepared to make, or, you know, some kind of potato. It's the fulcrum of every dinner, of every lunch, of every family gathering, and there's this biryani place and that biryani place, and then there are all these people who supply it, you know. So everyone competes with who has the best biryani cook, and most of those biryanis are not really biryanis. So there's all that's a pulao. Oh, but that's just rice with yellow coloring. Not being the greatest biryani fan in the world, as I'm not a mango shenanigans and this kind of, you know, relationship between the consumer and the supplier, kinds of migration, but also about nostalgia.
That's great. We've got some sound issues. I don't know if it's just nostalgia. Me. Can people hear Amir, or is it? No, we've got. It goes very fast and very slow for me.
It's bad everywhere, I think. Yeah.
It's bad everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think I mean, I understood the gist that you were saying. It's more expats and migrants than sort of straightforward. You know, that this is maybe a higher class, and there's this kind of vying for biryani. Biryani is the ultimate dish, and kind of you're saying, I think you were saying that you know, vegetarian dishes are very common, but they're not as kind of prestigious. So there's a lot of competition between suppliers for the best biryani.
Yeah, and you won't find it's not common to find people making vegetarian food that have become a very common feature of our life here, diasporic or expat life. Usually will offer you a meat dish, and most often the first thing they'll say, well, I do biryani and I do kebabs and I do some kind of what you might call a curry.
That's great. Such a shame about the sound problems, but I think we've got some of it, and really people just have to read this beautiful story, because that doesn't even come close to the kind of subtlety of the writing. So have we got both Maruba and Mafrua? These two sisters have done a brilliant story about East Bengali dishes, from Ilish Palau and biryani to jackfruit with tamarind and elo kashi pitta. I think we've got at least Mafrua here. So my question is, what's special about the Bangladeshi food you write about with such gusto? I'm not sure. Maybe the connectivity's gone. Can anyone see if Mafrua is still here?
I just looked at the participant list, Claire, and I can't see Mafrua. I did see Mafrua leave, but not rejoin, so I'm not sure there.
Okay, well, it's a great story and people need to read this. So if she comes back, will somebody alert me? Which means we've got a bit more time for Sophia, last but not least. So in Hungry Eyes, you examine a dystopian world of us and them. Amid this hostile realm, a pretentious poetess makes egg sandwiches for refugees, while her son and she ostensibly search for her lost husband, the boy's father. So here you interpreted the theme in relation to precarity and lack of food. Please could you talk to us about the us and them relating to food's haves and have-nots?
Hey, thank you, Claire. So nice to be here and to see everyone. Food really, as Annie said, I feel a little bit like an interloper here because I've never really written about food before. So in this story, it really plays a symbolic role more than a cultural role. The egg sandwiches were the most neutral and unspecific thing I could think of. They're emblematic of the shallowness of the poetess's morality. And what she and later her son do is they use these as a sort of smoke screen to visit this world and repurpose it for their own various reasons. For the poetess, it provides her identity. It gives her the basis of her poems. And then later the son, well, he's up to no good. His morals aren't very good either. So food really is, it's a token, it's a symbol, it's an excuse for them in this story. And their connection to the have-nots is, again, very flimsy and very fragile.
I thought it was so interesting to sort of connect it to refugees as well, and kind of ostensible good works, to go back to that word, you know, because obviously, as you suggest, these characters are often not what they seem. But yeah, I wonder if you could say a bit more about, you know, about sort of thinking laterally and applying food to something that a lot of us are thinking about, you know, since 2015, especially the problem of refugees.
Sorry, thinking laterally and applying food to the problem of laterally. Could you be a little more specific? I'm not sure what you mean there.
So I guess I'm interested that you, and the essay closes the volume, and it seemed like a good place to end with suffering and displaced people and their kind of shaky grasp on food. So I wonder if you could say a bit more about, you know, that relationship between people in very difficult circumstances, like refugees.
Okay, well, I mean, as you know, this story sheds light on this situation, but it's also more about the way in which we deal with people who are suffering and how sincere are we? What is doing good work here? What comprises good work? What are our intentions? So it's really an examination of how we justify the things we do and what goodness really is. At the start of the story, I think you think that the characters are pretty good, but as it unravels, the inauthenticity of this begins to become apparent. And this is something I really struggle with a lot because, you know, you can always sign petitions online, you can read the news articles, you feel really bad, but how much good are you actually doing? And this is just following that idea through to, well, the bitter end, I guess.
Fantastic. And you said you felt like an interloper, but you gave me one of the best recipes for the volume, which had to do with eggs. So could you tell us about your choice of recipe that you sent to me?
Okay, of course, yes, this is something I make quite a lot because it's easy and it makes my 4-year-old eat vegetables. It's a shansuka recipe, but I put in roasted eggplant. I sent you that recipe because I thought sending you a recipe for egg sandwiches would be a little boring. They're boring in the story and they're boring in real life. So the shansuka has the eggs, but not as tedious. So what you do is you make a tomato curry and you add roasted eggplant and then you cook the eggs in it and top it with feta cheese or white cheese. It's something we often have for weekend breakfasts, and my mother makes it, my sister makes it, and we all have our different spins on it. I'm not sure where we discovered this recipe or where it came from. It's not Pakistani, certainly, but we all seem to have come to it independently and have come up with different versions of it.
It's fast become a real staple in our household because it is easy and it's delicious. So thank you to everybody. Now we've got time for a few questions. So we've got one from Julie Mater. The idea of a need to preserve tradition by diasporic Asians in North America is truly represented by the biryani, sold in every imaginable motley outlet, as Dr. Amir Hussain points out. Sometimes this pursuing for the best biryani and sticking to preservation of culture leads to invention of tradition. So should we not celebrate this invention or fusion of a novel dish rather than critique the inauthentic conjuring of a traditional iconic dish? So Amir has mentioned, but anyone can answer this because biryani is a dish that came up a lot, both in the book and in our conversation.
If I can just say something, I don't have any kind of answer to that question. All I want to say is that I feel like doing something really naughty and putting a question out in public saying that the reason everybody cooks biryani is because it's so easy.
Well, not that. Sorry, Rana.
This is what Abdul Harim Sharar says in Guzishta Lucknow, written in the beginning of the 20th century. He says that, you know, there's a lot of discussion between Delhi and Lucknow cuisine. And he says, hey, everybody can make a biryani. It's easy to make a biryani, but it's very difficult to make a yakhni pulao.
I would agree with that.
You know, the delicate flavors, it's very difficult to bring that. If you use a lot of spices, and biryani does use spices, it's easier to make a dish tasty if you're using more spices and more ingredients. And as far as that authentic this thing is concerned, we are all evolving. And my daughter has become a vegetarian and she's in the process of becoming a vegan. And I now, you know, people tell me that this is blasphemy, but I cook all the dishes that I cook for myself with meat. I substitute soya nuggets for her. So I cook now even nihari with soya nuggets. So we are evolving, but yes, I do like to keep to tradition as far as certain foods are concerned, because there is something to say about the taste of dishes which are made in exactly the same way as, you know, there's a continuity, a sense of continuity.
I have to say that the biryani in the book is very difficult to make. It has 38 steps. It came from Kezahak and it defeated me. It was one of the few. I'm the opposite. I'm vegetarian but make meat for my sons. And so I wanted to make this one, but I'm still scared of it because it has so many steps and so many ingredients, this biryani. Although it looks delicious.
Go step by step. And by the way, I mean, you can also make a vegetarian biryani. So, Claire, I think you should try that.
That I can do.
Becoming quite popular.
Yeah, I feel like all these discussions about food authenticity and hating on fusion food, it's kind of fruitless because fusion food is what allows food to travel. So unless there's something, completely wrong with the biryani that people are making, I feel like it's so interesting that there are so many different kinds of biryani and new kinds popping up every day. And I think the best food often comes out of fusion. Like pizza, as we know, today is fusion food. One of my favorite memories of biryani is that when I was interning in New York near Rockefeller Center during my college years, there was this biryani cart outside, and they used to sell all different kinds of biryani, chicken, mutton, egg biryani, and it was so popular. So all the people, during a really busy lunch hour, used to come up and line up outside, and it's people from all over the world enjoying these different kinds of biryanis. So I think it's really interesting when food becomes, a phenomena like that.
Something what I know about history is that biryani was a fusion food. Actually, it wasn't, the original thing was yakhni pulao, and so for that time, for the time of the Mughals, it was a fusion food, something new. You add the korma curry and you add the rice and to kind of make something new, and so that became biryani.
I think the discussion on authentic food has always been really interesting, and whatever dish we look at in any context, so to speak, biryani, what Tarana rightly mentioned, fusion, and one dish which India is popular for, which is butter chicken, a fusion food. Beer is also fusion. So anything and everything pretty much that we eat and drink these days are in a way very much fusion food. They are not really, they didn't come out as let's prepare something, but mostly as confusion or experiment. And also what Rana was mentioning, right? The kaliyas and kolma. So I personally think now you don't have anything which is quote unquote authentic, essentially because I think the way people used to cook, with the things that they used to cook, we don't have those things anymore. For example, even if you change a wood fire to a gas stove or to electric stove, right? You're changing something. So you're losing the authenticity right there. From the kinds of vessels that we use, we have used multiple kinds of, there's something called tash, which was used to make flat kebabs, right? Which is not anymore. We use pans to make kebabs. The moment you change the utensils, you're changing the authenticity of the food. And I think that that's the beauty of it. I remember once I was in a kitchen and I was cooking, and then this one guy comes and he says, I want something authentic Indian. And I'm like, I was puzzled. I'm like, what is authentic Indian? We'll have to really go back to Harappa civilization to find something authentic Indian, because what we eat now is, as I mentioned, is Hindustani and not really quote unquote Indian cuisine. So this battle has been going on since forever. I don't think you can settle this with authenticity. It's always also the fight between the younger generation versus the older generation, where somebody is trying to sort of overpower, saying, no, this is what we used to eat. So holding your food dear to you is, I think that's where the food fight, a food war erupts.
If I may add to what you said about authentic Indian food, when I moved to Denmark, I like cooking, so I would make these Indian dishes, and I would be asked, what is that's really authentic about Indian food, and what is it that I really need to put to make it authentic? And I would say there's just one ingredient. And this is going to be very politically incorrect. So I would say there's only one ingredient. And they would say, what? And I would say servants. Obviously, it's really hard work doing all this. But again, on a more serious note, to be honest, all food's been passed around. I mean, all the ingredients have gone around cross cultures and changed ways, and they've gone into our different dishes. I think when we use the term authentic, I think obviously what we have in mind is something more like distinctive rather than authentic, because there's no author to any dish. So there's no authenticity in that sense. But anyway.
And more dangerously, I think we are also going towards heritization of food and heritization of dishes and claiming each dish to be your own. And, that's an endless thing. And that totally defies logic, in my opinion.
Claire, Mafruha has come back.
Oh, Mafruha. Fantastic. let's hope she can enter. Mafrua, hi. Mafrua, are you there? She's gone. What a shame. We have another question from Sikandar Malik, who asks, how can one decipher a ruler through his choice of food? Can anyone help? I don't know if we're talking about Mughals or more like Modi and Imran Khan and Boris Johnson, God forbid. Can anybody help? What sort of ruler? How can we judge a person by their food? Or decipher?
Decipher a ruler. That's
yes.
Okay, the kind of ruler there is. Oh dear.
I mean, Sadaf, you talk about Narendra Modi being offered an unusual type of samosa when Trump comes to India and he's given by Narendra Modi offers him samosa. So do you want to say about that and what it might tell us?
Yeah, that's broccoli samosa, which to many people they might not even appreciate. I like broccoli, I like samosa, but I don't like them together. So that's one part. But that's an interesting question on a ruler and their food. To my research so far, I think it also comes from the kinds of background you have and also what exactly you want to do with your nation. So if we start within what I like to call as Akhand Bharat, which included India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, bits of Afghanistan as well. When the rulers were coming in, when the different dynasties were coming in, starting from Chola to even for Harappa for the matter, what they wanted to do with the nation in their space. So for example, if we talk pre-Mughal, a lot of them came, ruled, so to speak, didn't really focus much on food because that wasn't really the case. And they were not here for long haul. They were not staying here. They just came, did the work, left. Then comes Mughal, which took the food of India. And when I'm talking about of India, I am talking about all sorts of dynasties, Harappa, Chola, Gupta, Ashoka, Maurya, then you have Qutub, slave dynasty, etc., etc. The food which existed and then refined it further. Not necessarily brought anything to India, including biryani. There's of course a long debate whether biryani was Indian or not. Similar dishes, of course, were found in India. So they tweaked that particular dishes. Akbar is really popular for kinds of dishes that he invented. Not just invented, but also tolerance that he had on particular days he won't eat meat, including also the Mughals' love for wine and alcohol. And on particular days, they will not drink. So let's say Thursdays, some of the rulers will not drink. And I think Rana Appa will further put lights on that. And then comes British, and now the current era that we are living in. I think it mostly depends on the kinds of mindset that you have. For example, as of now, I can speak only for India, that the push to vegetarianism is to a level which is absurd now, for two reasons. One of my known chef, a very popular chef in Delhi called Chef Sabi. For Delhi people who who lives in Delhi, they know about Lavash, which is in a Qutub complex. He has multiple restaurants as well. Early this year, he did food curation of Harappa civilization, and as per the research, it had meat. But when they did the curation, the meat were omitted completely, and it was only vegetarian, as if Indians only eat vegetarian food. Recently, there was a war happening on Twitter because of the new claim that Indians actually used to eat meat. And it was a surprise for most of us. Like, whoa, how can Indians eat meat? When the Hindu mythological books, Hindu as in the local, I would say Hindu mythology, it did mention about the kind of meat that we used to eat, including the meat that Brahmins used to eat, and even now as well. Brahmins do eat meat. It's not like Brahmins don't eat meat. So that's whole debate was happening. So I think rulers, yes, the kinds of mindset that they bring in, that's what they want to push. They need to be more tolerant, so to speak.
And on the chat, and there was a mention of the Begum of Bhopal and what she would have eaten. And I think, Siobhan, could you maybe, do you know anything about that side of things? With Siobhan having written a book on the Begum.
I do, but I suspect our question asker knows even more than I do. So
okay.
He's fishing.
I see.
So I'll leave it at that.
Okay. So we have a last question because I think we're nearly out of time. But this is a really interesting one. Given, and I can't see the name. Sorry, I can't see the name, but it says, given that food choices have become so politicized in India, does this anthology hope to achieve any other objective other than celebrating food cooked in Muslim communities across South Asia? Also, would panels agree that food, along with nostalgia, is what immigrants take with them and retain when migrating to other countries, hence the preponderance of Desi restaurants opened by the South Asia diaspora abroad? So, some last words. I mean, Sadaf has really kicked us off. I think clearly we do want to do more than just celebrating, especially at this time when there's, such, we've talked about biryani wars, but really the beef lynchings, the kind of promotion of vegetarianism that has been going on, really problematic. So there is that sort of stereotype busting. But does anyone want to say anything more about either of these two issues, about what the anthology hopefully might achieve, but also about diaspora and what food means to Muslim communities outside South Asia?
Claire, I want to. Hello. Hello.
Sorry, I can't really hear.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello. So, in Kashmir, for instance, even like the Brahmin Pandits used to offer the offering of fish and meat on the Shivratri, which would be like unthinkable in any other part of India, in most parts of India. So it was basically because of the geography, also because it's a cold, temperature here. And I think one of the ways in which these these books, anthologies like this can help is to like break those stereotypes about certain food being just associated with religion or to culture, but also there are geographic and other considerations also. So that's what I wanted to point out, and this is particularly important in the current scenario where food choices can lend people into trouble in India especially.
That's great. Any other last words from panelists?
The carrying of food did not only happen with immigration, it happened in India during the partition, where today you associate Delhi with chana and chole and kulcha, which was brought by the refugees to Delhi. It wasn't a local Delhi food. And because Delhi, traditionally, Shahjahanabad, old Delhi, has that green mutton, which is very popular there, and even now today it's sold over there. But chola kulchas became such a popular part, and now it's been adopted everywhere. It's a typical Delhi food, but it was introduced only in the 20th century. So, and I've seen so many of these foods shops in Old Delhi as well as in New Delhi, which have started from small stalls by refugees who had come, or even by immigrants who have come from villages to the city, and today they have huge restaurants and restaurant chains. So food has always, people have always carried food with them. We have regular Skype calls I have with my son, and I'm passing my recipes on to him, where we discuss how he's going to cook food for the whole week. So every Sunday we have video calls in which I give him minute instructions on how to cook the food that he's missing.
So we also carry food memories with us wherever we go, basically. And that's the link. I think that's the most sensuous link to the place that we belong to. It always is.
I think that's a great place to leave it. That's a beautifully expressed, both of you. And it's so great to meet some people for the first time and reconnect with old friends as well. And thank you to the audience. I'm sorry that we didn't get through every question, but and I'm very sorry about the technical problems early on, but I'm really glad you were all here. And just please, Keza, say thank you to Mafrua Maruba as well, and it was a shame that they didn't get to speak about theirs. Yes, thank you, and I'll make sure the recording goes online, so if you have people who want to see it, they can watch.
Thank you, everybody, and great to see you here. Bye-bye. Amir.
Thank you.
New friends are made. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure, definitely. Congratulations, everybody, for the lovely book.
Wonderful.
Congrats, everyone. Really nice to see you.
Thanks, Claire, and congratulations, everyone.
And Claire, special thanks to you for
Absolutely
bringing us all together.
I'm glad.
I hope we meet again one day over around the dinner table, a big dinner table.
Well, we're trapped on this island for some time, I think.
Yes.
Maybe on better times, we can cook all the dishes that we have written about and have a feast.
And be together.
That would be great.
Yes.
A huge thank you to everyone.
Goodbye. A happy New Year and Merry Christmas to everyone.